Welcome back. Time now for Back Pages tonight here on Sky Sports News, bringing you a first look at the sports stories making the headlines in the morning's newspapers, and there's plenty to get through. Joining us on the show are the Athletics football correspondent David Ornstein and the Times football reporter Charlotte Duncker. A welcome to you both. Let's quickly run everyone through the back pages, starting with the Telegraph, which leads, of course, with an image of Sven-Goran Eriksson, who's passed away, with his quote, "Don't be sorry, smile," as the headline. They also carry Sam Dean's story, Raheem Sterling interested in United. On the back of the Eye, no one could have guessed the Three Lions' first foreign coach would prove to be such an English gentleman. And Osimhen prefers Chelsea transfer to Saudi switch. And the back of the Sun, thanks boss, Beck's forever grateful to the manager he served as Three Lions captain. On the Guardian's back page, farewell to the manager who hid a flame inside his glacier. The former coach, who's died at 76, thought chasing trophies and the good life was a simple pursuit as he enjoyed success in multiple countries. They've also got the Sterling story. Sterling stalled, winger open to United move, but wants contract issue resolved. OK, let's start then with tributes to former England manager Sven-Goran Eriksson, who's died at the age of 76. And with the back of the Sun, Charlotte, thanks boss, Beck's forever grateful to the manager he served as Three Lions captain. I mean, a sad day, and the respects being paid by everyone. And David Beckham there, his captain, one of a number of high-profile people who've had such huge respect for him.
Yeah, a really sad day, and I think it's testament to who Sven-Goran Eriksson was as a man as well as a manager. When you see the tributes that have been paid by all of his former players, it's not just the generic rest in peace. There's paragraph after paragraph as to what he's done to help these players, the relationships that they had with them. David Beckham wrote a nice little paragraph on his Instagram about the trip that he took over to Sweden to see Sven in his house in his last few months alive, and the moments that they shared together. And one of the last things that he said to him was for him to live his life and be happy. And I think that is one of the things that Sven-Goran Eriksson did. I think it's very easy in football to get sucked into this life of football being the matter of life and death. And I think he was one of the few football managers who managed to still live his life to the full. And over these last few months, obviously, everyone's come out with amazing tributes to him after he announced earlier in the year that he had pancreatic cancer, and unfortunately it was terminal. And I think in that piece there that you've got on the screen now, it speaks to his children, and they say how grateful he was that he got to hear these tributes before he passed away. And I think every single person that you speak to about him, everyone's got something positive to say. And I think when you look back to when he was first appointed as England manager, which I'm sure we'll touch on shortly, for him to be getting the tributes that he's getting now just is testament to the job that he did during his 5 years in charge of the England team.
Yeah, I'll just pick up on that, Charlotte. I'll bring David in just a second, but I just want to pick up on what you said then. You know, it was controversial, wasn't it, when he was appointed, the first non-English manager, despite the fact, of course, he had a glittering CV from his time at clubs in Europe.
Yeah, of course. I think now when you look back at the headlines, some of them are quite shocking. I think it was as if they were appointing a man who'd never won anything. This man had won a UEFA Super Cup. He'd won titles at Benfica. He'd won Serie A. He was known as one of the most successful managers in Europe, one of the best managers in Europe. The FA just hadn't plucked someone from obscurity and dropped him into the England team. So I think looking back at it now, it was a bit of a narrow-minded view from maybe a lot of the English media. The headlines really looking back were quite bad. They were really negative. I think Sven said at the time that he sort of expected it. He was the first foreign manager to come and manage the English national team, which it just goes to show, like I just said, the job that he did, the way he is respected now by probably every person in the media, all his former players, to go from where he went at the start to those headlines to the way that he's being remembered now today, goes to show just exactly the job that he did. And one of my colleagues, John Percy, wrote a big piece in the Telegraph about going to his house and the calmness and kindness and consideration that was given to him. And if you think about the way some of the British media treated him, of course, there was the phone hacking scandals. We all know about his marital affairs and all the relationships that he was in that obviously made the front pages of the tabloids and not just the back. For him still to have the respect of journalists, to invite them into his home, to give him the time of day, to give everyone the time of day, really. I just think that's testament to the sort of man that he was.
Yeah, I mean, David, he wasn't an England manager, an English manager rather. What do you remember about his appointment? And what about that 5-1 win in Germany? Because the best way to endear yourself to England fans, England players, is to do well. And that was a rare night.
Yeah, I'll never forget that, actually, Dave. It was an iconic occasion, historic in the annals of English football legend, you could say. And it was a bit of a struggle in the months and the period leading up to that. And he got the job and got England's qualification campaign back on track. And that night in Germany was just unforgettable. The goals, the celebration. We remember Michael Owen, Emil Heskey, Steven Gerrard, and the rest of them. And that was all inspired by Sven-Goran Eriksson. Of course, his trusted assistant, Tord Grip, was a firm part of it at the time. As Charlotte points out, he'd been vastly successful at the likes of Lazio and in Portugal, his homeland, Gothenburg, Sweden. And this is a man who was linked with the managerial vacancies prior to the England job. I think it was Chelsea and Manchester United. And, you know, what he did with England is maybe appreciated more now than it was at the time. And listen, it's a day of mourning, but also of celebration as well. And clearly that's how he wanted it to be in this sort of tour he did towards the end when he visited some of his old clubs, Sampdoria, Lazio, Liverpool, the club that he supported and managed a Legends team. He wanted everybody to sort of celebrate his life and their own lives. And I mean, he had a good time as well. Let's not forget with some of his antics that he got up to. Even though he was a private man, he had some fun as well. And it's been lovely reading all the tributes. I saw a good piece on the sort of front of the Guardian by Paul Hayward, fantastic sports writer, and he sort of points out that this was maybe the last in the breed of managers who kind of played with some fun and passion and the human side, and not just in a tactical straitjacket and managing sort of multimillionaire footballers who need to be told what to do. There was a bit of freedom under Sven, and that's a lovely sort of memory to have of him. He's clearly was a very special guy and a top football coach too.
Yeah, Charlotte, those multi-million-pound footballers that David kind of refers to, many of whom have paid tribute today. Of course, they were collectively known as the Golden Generation. Was he unlucky with them? I mean, 3 quarter-finals at major tournaments. We look where England are these days. You might say with that generation he kind of underachieved, but kind of back then it was a pretty decent effort.
Yeah, I think obviously in hindsight, we all look at that team on paper and that squad and we think, how on earth didn't they go on and win something? But if you look at it in terms of the history of England and where England were after Kevin Keegan left and then Sven coming in, many people weren't expecting them to even qualify for the next World Cup. Obviously, David mentioned then the 5-1 against Germany. There was the draw against Greece at Old Trafford. I think Sven-Goran Eriksson gave England fans of a certain generation 2 of the greatest nights that they'll probably ever remember. And that includes going into the current Euro squad, obviously, with the success that Gareth Southgate had. So I think, obviously, in hindsight, we can look back at that golden generation. Everyone's going to always look back at them and say they underachieved. But things changed when Gareth Southgate came in and that they turned into a team. I think when Sven was there, they were still very much a group of individuals. And I think he probably did the best as what he could do. He was unlucky with injuries a bit, unlucky with the draws that he got. But I think 3 successive quarterfinals in major competitions, given where England had been at in the few years before he was appointed. I think obviously we can look back and say that he didn't really do such a terrible job as some people might look back and reflect.
No, he certainly didn't. Let's focus on the tributes that have been paid to a hugely respected figure in football then. David, I mean, we touched on it already, but your thoughts about the type of man that he was. I'm thinking in contrast as a manager to some of the kind of blood and thunder types we'd seen kind of previously and that are more common in football. He was the softly spoken, the calm influence in that dressing room.
Yeah, you can remember his voice very vividly, and even his final England press conference in Baden-Baden when he was sort of warning the nation and in particular the media, Wayne Rooney, don't kill him. Very softly spoken, very caring and conscientious. Charlotte references the John Percy piece in the Telegraph when he went over to see him. They played a bit of pool together. It was a lovely sort of tribute John's written, and right at the end of it he said, you know, Sven-Goran Eriksson reminded you to be nice to people. We don't see that much of that sort of sentiment these days, and when you look at the managerial positions he had, it wasn't just those big ones we mentioned prior to England. It went a bit obscure after that. There was the crazy days at Manchester City and Notts County as director of football, I think, with some grand plan to come up to the Premier League, which fell apart. And then he took some international positions. He failed to qualify for the 2010 World Cup in South Africa, but then he took over the Ivory Coast and managed them there. They didn't get out of the group. Then he finished with the Philippines, bizarrely. But what I wanted to say with that is that all of the jobs he got was largely because of his quality as a coach, but his qualities as a human being. It doesn't seem there's much of a bad word said about him anywhere. And I think every tribute you see today, I read from Peter Crouch giving him his debut for England. Like universally, they seem to be praising this man who was just so kind and nice and loved by everybody that he came into contact to. And you may say, you know, to be a successful manager, you maybe need to be harsher and govern in a different way, but he had plenty of success in his own right. And Theo Walcott was on the radio this evening sort of talking about that there was a stare that you did feel his presence when he wasn't happy about something and things weren't going right. But above all else, you know, football and the world has lost a beautiful human being, and it was a real journey and adventure he enjoyed. And I think if we can all embody some of the spirit he left with to just sort of cherish these days, then we won't be doing too badly.
Yeah, David, Charlotte, lovely words from both of you. Thank you. Tributes continue to be paid to Sven-Goran Eriksson, who has died aged 76. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we'll look at more of the back pages, including this in the Telegraph. Sam Dean writes, Raheem Sterling is interested in United. You're watching Back Pages tonight, and welcome back to the Athletics football correspondent David Ornstein and the Times football writer Charlotte Duncker. All right, we're going to go to the Telegraph and talk Raheem Sterling, because transfer deadline, of course, on Friday. And this piece by Sam Dean says Sterling interested in United, winger set for Chelsea, talks to resolve contract issues. David, I mean, expensive wages and all of that, but this would be a dramatic turn of events, wouldn't it? With perhaps even Sancho coming the other way.
Yeah, for the Manchester City ex-player, certainly. But he has talked in an interview, I think Sam references in that piece, about growing up supporting Manchester United. So you can see the potential attraction there. Somebody that's played now for Liverpool, Manchester City, Chelsea. He moves among the big clubs and he's done a good job at all of them. Clearly surplus to requirements at Chelsea, not part of their plans. He trained away from the club last week. He's been stripped of his shirt number, and now something needs to be sorted out, or does it? Because he's on a contract for 3 years, in excess of £300,000 a week, and that is his priority, we understand, to resolve. And Sam mentions that within his article. They're going to have to try and sort it out between him and Chelsea before he then goes on to hold talks about a potential move elsewhere. So some pretty furious dialogue's going to have to take place in these next few days. In terms of Sancho coming in the opposite direction, let's see. These things are normally extremely complicated. Do Chelsea want to make it happen? I think they've made an inquiry through his representative, so there's an element of interest there. But they're exploring all manner of options for attacking players, including Victor Osimhen, who I think we'll come on to talk about later. And whether it actually materialises, I'm not sure. But it is certainly one of those subplots we'll be talking about in these final days of the window.
Yeah, Charlotte, I mean, Chelsea have got no shortage of kind of wide players, have they? I guess they want a centre forward, and we will get on to Osimhen, but let's focus on Sterling. Their priority has to be to offload at the moment, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think we all know the amount of top talent that they've got in their so-called bomb squad at the minute. None of them are training, and we're obviously going to talk about Osimhen, but they need to sell players to be able to raise the funds to bring more players in. So if players like Sterling, we know that he's not part of the plans going forward this season. But as David said, he's got 3 years left on a very highly paid contract. So at this moment in time, if Chelsea can't reach an agreement with him in terms of contractually, or maybe agreeing to pay, as you can see on there, pay part of his wages and let him go on loan to another club, although I do understand that they would prefer a permanent deal to get him out of the club for both parties. I think unless an agreement can be reached, then if it gets to Friday and that hasn't happened, then he's still going to be a Chelsea player. So it's going to be a lot of negotiating that has to be done in the next few days. I think his high wages are going to put off a lot of clubs, but the closer it gets to Friday's deadline, is that something that can be negotiated with Chelsea in terms of them paying a percentage of that going forward in this season? Who can afford to take him long term? What's going to happen there? I think obviously you've seen Manchester United being mentioned. Is that where they need to be spending their salary budget on another player like that? I'm not too sure. That's maybe a conversation for them to be having this week. I know that they're obviously prioritising central midfield. So I think there's a lot of spinning plates going on at a lot of clubs this week, and we could see a lot of interesting moves before Friday's deadline.
Yeah, well, the Daily Mail, which we just saw then, said pay Raheem off, with Chelsea maybe topping up the salary there. Let's focus on Victor Osimhen then, the back of the eye. Osimhen prefers Chelsea switch, David, to Saudi switch. What do you make of this?
Well, we don't know, how far the Saudi interest has gone, how credible it is. There's certainly an element of interest there, but it doesn't seem to be a move that appeals to him, judging by the comments of his agent, I think, on social media today, and widespread reports that it's Europe that he wants to stay in. This is one that we understand is going to go down to transfer deadline day, and it's going to be one of those dramatic stories about where Victor Osimhen ends up. Chelsea retain an interest in him, as we've reported for weeks now. It's just about what form the deal might take. They initially were looking at just doing it as a loan, but whether that's going to be possible or not is a different matter. And they'll be looking at multiple options, but certainly he's high among them. And who else? Maybe Paris Saint-Germain earlier in the market, when Kylian Mbappe had gone, were a club that had a strong interest in Victor Osimhen. I don't know if it's there anymore, but certainly, that could be really lively, because although maybe his stock has fallen a little bit, it's not like anybody's going to pay the €100 million sort of valuation that people were talking about. He's still a box office name, a big time striker, scores lots of goals, will make lots of headlines. So yeah, definitely that's one we need to pay close attention to.
As you were saying that, David, it sounded like perfect fit for Chelsea. And I guess, Charlotte, if Chelsea do manage to land Osimhen, who's a pretty big fish, they banged 6 past Wolves on Sunday. They've got some attacking threat. I mean, does this suddenly change the kind of the complexion of their season potentially, and what people are expecting of them?
I'm not sure they're going to come up against many more amenable defences than Wolves were at the weekend, to be fair. I think they might find it a bit more difficult going forward. But yeah, I thought their forward play, they've got Cole Palmer, the best young talent in the Premier League, who's capable of creating anything. We know that they obviously signed Neto from Wolves. Madueke looked really good on the opposite wing there. They've got so much talent going forward. Nicholas Jackson, I think, still maybe flashes to deceive a little bit. So Osimhen would be a massive upgrade on him. So yeah, what an amazing attacking talent they've got. But I think defensively, they did look a bit weak at Molineux yesterday. So maybe they could do with looking at a couple of additions there, because no doubt about it, Chelsea will probably be spending before Friday's deadline.
Absolutely. And talking of Friday's deadline, just wonder if this one will get done. Mark Gahey, David, as this one has been dragging on all window. It seems like it's getting closer. Where are we with it?
Yeah, that's Sammy Mockbell's report in the Daily Mail. Sammy's been well across this story throughout. And, Newcastle have clearly identified him, and Eddie Howe in particular, as his top target for the window. And that's the player he wants to sign. Newcastle have made multiple bids now, maybe 3, 4 even, all of them knocked back by Crystal Palace and their chairman, co-owner, Steve Parish. But could it break through before that deadline? Clearly, Newcastle haven't gone away. They have explored other targets. They're duty bound to, because they might have to turn to one of them or to go with what they've got at the moment. But that door just hasn't been closed. I don't think that there was a rejection of the most recent offer, which means there's perhaps some wiggle room. Sammy's reporting suggests it's close to an agreement. I don't know exactly where it is right now. And these things are always delicate. Pressure coming from all sides to stay, to go. And it just seems that, Newcastle have gone really far on this, and understandably so, because he's a top player and a great character, Mark Gay, and we've seen him rise to prominence with England, and Newcastle have stretched their budget. Will it be enough? It's a massive decision for Steve Parish and the Palace hierarchy. They've already sold Joachim Andersen. So to lose both of their centre-halves in the same summer would be a brave thing to do, but you would back them and their sporting director, Dougie Freedman, to replace, as he's done in the past. So these are sort of tense moments, and I'm not going to predict which way it's going to go.
OK, David, Charlotte, we're running out of time. Thank you ever so much. Just touching on the Mail, who Sandro Tonali's 10-month ban for betting offences expires on Tuesday. That a story by Craig Hope, a player already at Newcastle but might feel like a new player. What type of player will return, he asks. Now, if you missed any of the show, there's another chance to see Back Pages tonight at hour. And the show is also available as a podcast. Just download Back Pages on Apple, Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And join us again on Tuesday night when our guests will be The Telegraph's Jason Burt and Daily Mail's Craig Hope.